Ash is looking at me like a disappointed mother. She's staring at me like the mother who realized her kid sucks at a sport. She's come out to watch me, and I'm like kicking the ball just out of bounds.
Just trying to think of something nice to say. No, I mean...
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Shat The Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I am one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my co-hosts, Ash Plethora Schlafly.
Hi, y'all.
And Big D Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And each week we take a look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. The movies we cover are chosen by you, the listeners, who generously commission the films you love. If you'd like to see all the movies we have covered, will cover, or want to choose one for yourself, please visit shatthemovies.com and have a look. At the end of each podcast, we'll provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie would take to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button and share with a friend. That's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, you can subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, True Detective, Watchmen, and Lovecraft Country. You can find all that information and past episodes at shatontv.com. And finally, you can hang out with us live all week long by following and subscribing to our Twitch channel, shatthemovies.com/Twitch, where we play video games, host watch parties, and end each week on Friday with a Shappy Hour cocktail party starting at 9 Eastern. In addition to that, the King Bee and I will be doing The Expanse every Wednesday starting in December when The Expanse Season 5 starts. So get caught up, get your Amazon Prime, and we'll see you there. All that being said, Big D, what movie are we reviewing today?
Well, Gene, before we get into what we're doing today, I hope I can just take a couple minutes with you guys and with the audience to address something that I think I've been holding off on for a while. And we do get questioned a lot as to, what happened to Roger. And if you listen to his last episode, which was in August, I think it was The Phantom Menace, at the end of the podcast, we allowed him to kind of air his feelings on why he was leaving. And at that point, we were just going to let it go. I was going to take the high road. But recently, we've been getting more questions, and Roger has been, discussing this openly on social media. So I thought it would be a good time for us to address it for all of our listeners, because it's a question that we get, and we think we should do that for transparency. And we should just kind of take a couple minutes, answer the question. So once and for all, we can be done with it. And back in July, I was having a dilemma. Do we keep going? And I said, I'd like to kind of get an estimate of how much time it takes to create a podcast. So the numbers that I'm going to give you are coming from July of this year. So it's much higher than that now. But at that point, I said, we had done 413 episodes. That's an hour each to publish that onto the web. Images, SEO, YouTube. That's a total of 413 hours. Then for Shat on TV, I had been on 207 of the 238 roughly episodes that we had done. I'd skipped some of American Gods, Watchmen, and then also you guys did Lovecraft Country. So that's about a 2-hour watch normally, 1.2 hour for notes, 1.2 for recording, and that's a low estimate. About 3 hours for editing, and that was all split between Gene and I. That's 104 episodes roughly a piece at that. So that's 1,223 hours. Of the movies, I had done 175. At that point, we're about 20 beyond that now. I had missed 7. So that's 2 hours watching, hour 0.2 of notes, hour and a half of recording, 6 hours to 7 hours of editing. That was 1,797 hours. And then miscellaneous tech. That is importing emails to the web, setting up the feeds. It's about 30 hours. Web maintenance, backup, and security. That's about another 30 hours. So I'd calculated at this point that I had spent 3,493 hours, not counting email or social media. That's 145.5 days of my life that I had dedicated to creating this podcast. Away from my daughter, up late at night when I could have been doing other things. And I chose to do that because I love the audience and I love what we do. At that point, I decided, let's keep going. I can do it because I think I owe it to the listeners. So I chose to continue to push on. Roger left the podcast, not because of personal issues, but if I'm going to be honest, it's because he lacked the work ethic that the rest of the team, I think, felt it deserved or needed. Every one of the other hosts refuses to work with Roger. This is not a personal thing that people don't like him. I love him. I really do as a person, as a friend. I still talk to him. But Roger is the guy who shows up to Thanksgiving. When the food is out, it's on the table. You've been cooking for days. You bought the food. He sits down and complains about the way you set up the table without any regard for the hours it took of food prep that people spent in the kitchen. And to be honest, he has a lack of honesty and accountability when it came to things with the podcast. He would say, oh, I'm going to do it. Oh, I promise I'll do it. Then he wouldn't do it. He'd publish late or he'd do a half-ass effort. This isn't the first time he left the podcast. Gene and I had refused to work with him on 2 different occasions, going back 3.5 years. I think it was during Game of Thrones. We said, we're done, Roger. We're done. If you don't want to put the time in, don't half-ass it. So he left. We continued on. But because we love him and we love what he contributed, we kind of saw past that and gave him another chance, He would always say, I'm going to contribute, I'm going to do it. And he would usually do that for a short time. But then he would revert back. And this isn't all negative about Roger, because I'll be honest, he's funny. He is the funniest person on this podcast. He's unconventional in the way he thinks. And that led us most of the time to some of our funniest moments. We would never get there without Roger. Some of the topics and some of the things we talked about. But that came at a huge cost. Roger would have us recording 20 to 30 minutes longer than we needed to. Since he wasn't editing, he didn't care. So he would just ramble. He would just take us off everywhere. And as a result, the rest of the team had to pick that up. So that became something difficult to deal with. Then there was a lack of respect for the audience. He would watch movies and give a minimum effort most of the time. We actually had a commissioner write in and say, did Roger even watch the movie that he commissioned? Because Roger was missing basic plot points, basic things that happened in the movie. Go back and listen to Mac and Me or to Heat. You can clearly tell that Roger hasn't watched those movies. Or if he did, it was playing in the background. To where the person wrote in who had commissioned this, and this is a direct letter from the person who commissioned it. I've been listening to, actually binging your podcast, and a couple of things stands out to me. Does Roger actually even watch the movie? Also, who is the average viewer he keeps referring to? I almost screamed in my car. You guys were much more patient than I was. I was like, why doesn't he watch the entire movie? Doesn't he get it? And don't even ask me to start with Shawshank. On the flip side, Roger is low-key funny. You guys keep doing what you do. I love the humor and the banter. That's someone who paid us money to review a movie. That really is something that goes against my core values. So Roger will continue to be somebody that I care about. I value him. And if he, after this, hearing this, he doesn't want to continue to be my friend, I can't help that. But I can't have a working relationship with him when the person I'm working with doesn't have the same respect and love for the listeners and the product that we create. Okay. He's going to claim, and he has already, it's personal. People are mean and Gene's a narcissist. 4 independent people on this podcast have all decided we cannot work with him. This is nothing personal. The stress of him not stepping up on a consistent basis is what called the personal strife. It's what caused it. And my personal opinion is after your 4th car crash, you got to stop saying, oh, it wasn't my fault. Somebody just hit me. Stop blaming the other drivers. Maybe it's time to sit back and evaluate whether it's your driving that's causing these accidents. So I hope that we can put this all to rest. I love Roger as a person, but I also have a duty to the podcast and to the listeners who we've made connections with over the few years, the 4 years that we've been doing this. The last 3 months without Roger, I'll be completely honest, we're about to hit 2 million. This episode, we will hit the 2 million mark for Shat The Movies alone. Our numbers have been increasing steadily week over week. So this is not a question of diminishing listenership. We're reaching more listeners than we ever have, and it continues to increase. We are now scheduled 13 months out. People still love the commissions. They dedicate these to their friends and family. They pay us to sit down and watch a movie for them. So we're flattered. I know people are listening. But if you've ever enjoyed what we're doing, this is the time that you can either send us an email saying you like the show, leave us a positive review, because just like I want Roger to reevaluate what he thinks is the reason he's on this podcast, we are also reevaluating what we're going to do. So we would like to hear from you on what you think. And now I'm off my soapbox.
And if I could just take a second, Big D, one, I appreciate what you had to say, because it really means a lot for you and I. I mean, this is it's second nature. It's years of history. But for Ash, who had no skin in the game prior to season 3 of Westworld, stepping up and being huge in Westworld, also doing Lovecraft Country with me. Ash is taking a lot of shit from a lot of people on Twitter and on YouTube. I think it's kind of bullshit. That she's being singled out. And so for if you're listening to Ash and you think that maybe she's uptight and you think that maybe she's not that fun and you think that she's the PC police, really objectively listen to the last, 5-6 episodes where she's talking about dicks and blowjobs,
dick rooms,
and getting shit from me for being upper middle class. I mean, Ash puts up with a lot of shit from the two of us and does it with grace and class. So, she's different. Yeah, she's a different voice in the podcast. That's kind of the idea.
Yep.
And on that note,
wait, are we doing a movie tonight? Let's do a movie. And it ironically, it has something to do kind of with the podcast. One of our listeners, Justin, was kind enough to throw us a couple dollars to help us keep going. And he requested that we do the 1986 American Western comedy, The Three Amigos.
Well, and Justin sent us a letter and he said, "Hello, Gene, Big D, and Ash. I commissioned The Three Amigos because one of you spoke up and requested a patron for this movie. This is my love letter to you all for sustaining me through the tedium of approximately 150 workdays. It's easy to kick back to a thing that helps me earn. Red Wing work boots, polarized lenses, rash cream, audiobooks, and sweet chat. Thus the gratuity. It's a service that you all have provided, and it's very much appreciated. My knowledge of this movie was that it was on VHS in our living room as a kid. It made my dad laugh, and it was never too racy for all 6 of us to watch. This request, though, began with a brief Venmo contact with Senor Ebert in early April 2020. This makes that bat-eating scene timely. I enjoy the theory that everything after their campsite scene is a vivid, dying hallucination. Which amigo, though, is having this vision? Who cares? It's a 3-ham schlock fest, and I don't need a tether to reality to enjoy the show. But I will enjoy hearing your take on this film. When the pod for this drops, I'll be out en route making deliveries. Whether it's Amazon Prime or Little Timmy's Heart Meds, I'm going to set that parcel on the porch, drop a GPS pin to complete the stop, and walk back to my little brown package car with a smile on my face, a spring in my step, because the Shat Crew's in my headphones. You each evoke laughter and make me less of an asshole to my customers. We're in the Ozarks on the Springfield Plateau, so if any of you ever visit, give us a holler, and we'll help steward you on a local day float in a tandem or solo canoe. I would like to know if any of you have ever floated in a canoe. We prefer seeing to the best paddler and the one of you least likely to just get shit hammered first. So who among you do you send? All the best, Justin."
I think we'd have to send a Frankenstein here, because King B is the superior man. King B is the superior man on the water. Ash has the greatest alcohol tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
King B and canoeing, that was probably the worst day of my recent life. Roger and I went out in Arizona with King B to go canoeing. These canoes were not built for me. It was a horrible weekend excursion where I ended up losing half of King B's canoe. We ended up giving up halfway through and going and getting some kind of tacos or some kind of Mexican food. But it sounds like it'd be fun. I just need a really big canoe. really big canoe.
Well, and I have to say, like, I smiled, Justin, reading your letter because this is clearly the season of Amazon packages, right? Like, everybody's getting them delivered. And I feel like I have 3 times as much because I'm not going to actual stores. So I'm doing all my shopping from home. And just the thought of like a delivery, like our delivery driver walking up to our house listening to Shat, like, that just blows my mind. And it makes me incredibly happy. And, you know, we appreciate what you're doing for sure, because you guys have been absolutely integral to us surviving this pandemic, because we have ordered literally everything and it's been delivered. So thanks for that. And thanks for listening to us and choosing to listen to us while you do it, because I think that's pretty fucking cool.
Well, just for you, Justin, Three Amigos is a 1986 American Western comedy directed by John Landis and written by Lorne Michaels, Steve Martin, and Randy Newman. Yes, you heard that correctly. Randy Newman. Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short star as the title characters, 3 silent film stars who are mistaken for real heroes by the suffering people of a small Mexican village. They must find a way to live up to their reputation and stop a malevolent bandit. Rotten Tomatoes critics reviews gave Three Amigos 5.16 out of 10, and film critic Roger Ebert, whoever he is, awarded the film 1 out of 4 stars, saying the ideas to make Three Amigos into a good comedy are here, but the madness is missing. Now, Big D, you and I have a long history with Three Amigos, so I want to start with the newcomer, Ash.
Okay. So I didn't think I had ever seen this movie before because I had no recollection of it, but I happened to mention it to my parents. And apparently this was something they were obsessed with when I was a kid, and it was like on all the time, but I genuinely didn't remember anything about it. And as I started watching it, still didn't remember anything about it. So I was a complete fresh watch, which I want to kind of state from the outset was difficult seeing a movie like this at the age of 37 for the first time, because I think this is one of those great classic, like preteen, like junior high, you think those kinds of comedies are hilarious. So my review will be coming from old Ashley rather than young Gene and Big D. But I do want to state that I think that I figured out the perspective that I'm going to approach this. So this is that movie for you guys. For me in junior high, it was that Mel Brooks movie, Robin Hood Men in Tights. I could quote that movie literally from dusk till dawn. Please, somebody out there commission it. Totally love it. I think it's absolutely hilarious, but I watched it in my adulthood with a friend who'd never seen it, and they were just like straight faced the whole time. And like, this is the worst movie I've ever seen. And objectively, I can understand that, because I think that there's some movies you just enjoy more because you remember them from when you were a kid. So I'm going to try to watch this through the eyes of you guys and enjoy it more because of how much you guys enjoyed it. And I prepared myself for the amount of quoting and impressions that are going to happen tonight.
Did I enjoy this? Hell yes, I enjoyed this. Justin, thank you. I needed this. This was like the perfect elixir, the perfect medication I needed for just a stressful week, month, year that 2020 was. This movie brought me back. I was a kid and we would go to movies in Playhouse 4. And as kids, you don't have money. So we would have one friend go in, buy a ticket. And then if you went to the second floor, you could go to the right-hand side. And we knew they had a fire escape, a fire exit, that the alarm didn't work. So we would always climb the fire escape. Somebody would go in, open the door, we'd come in. This day, we almost got caught. So one of the ushers who was like, hey, you guys, he came running up. We all parted ways. People went to hide in the theaters. I ended up being trapped in a stall like you would see in like John Wick, where you're standing on the toilet seat so your legs don't hang down. We managed to evade getting captured. We sat down and watched this movie. And ever since that day, I don't know that I've watched it completely. It has held a warm place in my heart. And this movie was the escape that I needed. It was a great film to watch again. And spoiler alert, I'm going to gush all over this like Roger and Gene on Spaceballs. So, woo, let's go.
That's Spaceballs, the movie, not the time Roger and I got really fucked up in the forest and rubbed our taints all over a log. Ash, I feel really seen by your statement that this is a movie you really should see as a preteen. My friend since the 6th grade and the funniest person I know, Alan Hunt, he turned me on to Three Amigos when I was 12 years old. We watched it at his house. And it was a lot like when I watched Cable Guy with Roger and Big D, where it's like seeing it in a room with your friends made it so much funnier. And Three Amigos is a movie that is best enjoyed with friends who also love the movie, preferably someone who's seen it before and can like quote it at you so you really get the permanence in your brain. I honestly remember my friends' impersonations of characters in Three Amigos more than I remember the actual performances in Three Amigos. But Justin, I echo what Big D said. Thank you so much for this laugh. I got to watch it twice, once on edibles and once sober. Great both times. Big D, let's get to that trailer.
Let's ride!
The Three Amigos. They were the biggest stars of their day.
The Three Amigos are history.
But that was yesterday.
Look, boys, I know show business. Something always turns up. Telegram for the Three Amigos.
Come with me where moonbeams paint the sky.
Who are you?
The Three Amigos!
I like this guy. They are funny guys. Just kill one of them.
Steve Martin. Chevy Chase.
Do you have anything besides Mexican food?
Martin Short. The Three Amigos.
Throw down your gun! Not you, Dusty!
Sorry.
You're so brave.
Whoa, horses!
Three Amigos.
I'll come back one day.
Why?
In 1916, the bandit El Guapo and his gang harassed the Mexican village of Santo Poco. Carmen, daughter of the village leader, sees a silent film featuring the Three Amigos, a trio of gunfighters who protect the vulnerable from villains. Believing them to be real heroes, Carmen sends a telegram asking them to come and stop El Guapo. Lucky Day, Dusty Bottoms, and Ned Nederlander portray the Amigos on screen. After being fired by studio executive Harry Flugelman, they misinterpret Carmen's telegram as an invitation to perform a show for the people of Santo Poco. So, Justin, I I know we started off this entire podcast on kind of a sour note, and I hate to do this to you, man, but I got to be honest. I got to give you the honest review that you paid for. I will watch Three Amigos anytime, anywhere, but I have to admit that this first bucket is a bit of a snooze if you've never seen this movie before. It's that feeling you get when you're watching a movie you love with someone who hasn't seen it before, and then you start to realize, oh God, this part's a little slow. I wish I could fast forward a little bit. This joke isn't as funny to everyone. Three Amigos is still hilarious. Like, don't get me wrong, but the jokes don't really start until the Amigos steal their costumes and head to Mexico. There's a lot of filler in there.
So you're kind of reading my mind, because when I was watching this, I got really nervous because I know how much you guys like it. And I was like, shit, when is this going to get funny? Because it was like so boring. I mean, I almost fell asleep in the beginning, and I kept like kind of trying to hype myself up. I actually drank 2 cups of coffee in the first part of this movie because I wanted to make sure I was awake. I wanted to make sure I was giving it its due, but it was pretty slow. And that being said, though, I did like the very beginning. I typically really hate cheesy openings, but that musical opening that they have where the Three Amigos are singing their little song, I did think that was really charming. And I'll just wish the whole opening had been that funny, but give credit where it's due, Justin. I do believe that part was a pretty great way to start.
No, No, listen. I sat here quietly and let you go. We've done 2 almost perfect movies the last couple of weeks. We did Grosse Point Blank and Fargo. And I can't believe I'm going to say this about the Three Amigos. We needed that character development. You need those couple minutes in the beginning to understand what is Ned's motivation. Where does Ned get that good heart from that makes him want to go back and risk his life? Okay, why is Dusty such a dick? Yes, Lucky thinks he's the brightest guy in the room. We needed that in order to make their actions the rest of the film pay off. We needed it.
Are you seriously defending an exposition in a John Landis Chevy Chase vehicle? Like,
yes.
What?
Yes.
Ash, this is what it is you and I are the people who are watching Saturday Night Live and we're like, this sketch has gone on for 2 minutes too long. And Big D's like, tell me more.
Yeah. What was his childhood motivation to make him do that? Like, no, like,
why is Buckwheat singing?
No, most of the times I hate it, but for some reason in this movie, it probably is nostalgia glasses. Even that stupid silent film portion, it is brilliant. I could watch 2.5 hours of that alone. When the music kicks in, okay, and you see them, they're in full silent film makeup and they're mouthing the dialogues, the over the top action. I understand why you like Spaceballs now. This is so stupid, but it is brilliant.
It does set up that kind of meta comedy where like the Mexicans in the silent film are just white people dressed as Mexicans, you know, and it explains why these guys seem like absolute weirdos in real life, like why they over enunciate, because that's how you have to act in a silent film. When you bring them into the real world, they seem absolutely bizarre. So I'll give you that, Big D, but it doesn't justify the entire opening of the movie. And I'll give you the studio exec scene as an example. Like, you've got Chevy Chase, Martin Short, Steve Martin, John Lovitz, Phil Hartman, and Joe Montana. How can you not get a laugh? That you've got the cast right there. It's just not funny. This is the sort of Hollywood self-filleting, or as Roger calls it, self-flagellating, that we hated about LA Story. How are you not pushing back against this?
Yeah. I mean, this is the second time that we've seen Phil Hartman, and it's completely fucking wasted. Phil Hartman is hilarious. He did that terrible cameo in Fletch Lives that, you know, he showed up on screen. It was the one time where like, I was like, oh, and then he was gone. Like, it was such bullshit. And then here he's like, well, you know, you see, like, you know, he's doing that weird, like 1920s accent, and then he's gone. Like, he's just never back in. It's an absolute waste of talent. I mean, John Lovitz, whatever. I've never been a big fan of his, but come on, you got Phil Hartman. How do you only put him in the scene and give so much to fucking Chevy Chase?
No, this isn't about comedy. This is about establishing the desperate situation that they find themselves in. Why would movie stars go to Mexico? Because they're penniless. They're lost. It makes sense in the context of the film. It's very much needed.
They could have had the telegram guy come by with 2 telegrams. One's like, hey, your movies suck. You got fired. And then he comes by again. Hey, there's a job for you in Mexico. Boom, bang. We're in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Well, stopping at a cantina near Santa Poco, the Amigos are mistaken for associates of a fast-shooting German pilot who arrived just before they did. They perform a musical at the cantina and leave the locals confused. The Germans' real associates then arrive at the cantina and massacre the patrons. The next morning, when 3 of El Guapo's men come to raid the village, the Amigos do a Hollywood-style stunt show that leaves the men bemused. The bandits ride off, making everyone think that the Amigos have defeated the enemy.
So obviously the big gag of this movie, which would go on to inspire a ton of other films. I understand that. Like, I understand how important it was that they did it first. But this whole idea of like, you know, the celebrities are so famous that, you know, people are in awe of them. So that's the really funny gag in the bar, that they're all afraid of them because their guns are out, rather than the fact that like they think it's because they're famous. And I think that this shit happens all the time, especially in like today's age where like fame is more important than like acting, right? Like, where people are like, they just think really highly of themselves. And it reminds me, I actually met BJ Novak in a way like this, the guy from The Office. I don't know if you guys know
no idea who that is.
No idea.
You don't know who
Who's
fucking BJ Novak is?
No.
He's
but apparently he's very
hilarious.
famous.
Tell me who is he?
I should be
He
in
was
awe.
Ryan on The Office, the intern on The Office. He's like a famous comedy writer.
Wow, you're so lucky.
he was at the Bombay Club in New Orleans, which is, if you're ever going to New Orleans, they have great martinis. But he was sitting there and we needed like the salt shaker from his table. And so I got up to go ask for it. And we knew who he was. We went up to ask, for the salt shaker, and he got so upset. And he's like, I don't want to give you my autograph. And I was like, I'm here for the fucking salt shaker. Thank you. And like, he wound up being a cool dude and he bought us drinks all night. And that was nice. But like, I feel like this is like a really common thing where like celebrities think that they're incredibly like over important. And in this section of the movie, that was the first time that I did actually laugh because I thought that was an okay joke.
I don't think anybody knows who the fuck BJ Novak is, but this is 1960.
Everybody knows who BJ Novak is that has seen The Office.
Okay, we don't. But in 1916, the silent films, this was the new medium. So this was the first time somebody would be famous. And just the way that Martin Short, he embodies Ned. And he talks about little Nettie goes to war, little Nettie the Knickerbocker. He's a child star. So he's used to this and he's flattered by it. It's fantastic. But this movie catches me off guard. Okay, they're in the bar. The Germans come through. He says, my friends are not as nice as I am. And so now the whole town is on alert. They break into My Little Buttercup. And I'm thinking, okay, they're going to do a couple notes. Something's going to happen. They do the whole song. They don't truncate it at all. We see the whole thing. Dance number. They do the little 3-man weave. They let it marinate, okay, as we watch the horror on the patrons' faces in this bar. It is great.
And the funniest part of My Little Buttercup is actually when Chevy Chase is just tinkling on the piano and he looks over his shoulder and he's got that look on his face. And I'm like, oh my God, Chevy Chase being funny. But Three Amigos, it just wouldn't be Three Amigos without these songs. You got the singing bush, Blue Shadows on the Trail, and then this, yes, My Little Buttercup. All of them were written by Randy Newman. And it pisses me off because My Little Buttercup is perfect. I sing the song to myself randomly. It's so goddamn good. And it makes me angry because I detest Randy Newman. The only thing I can be grateful for is that I didn't have to hear him sing in his own voice like in Toy Story.
Yeah, I had no idea until I read the notes about how Randy Newman was so heavily involved in this. And I don't know. I mean, I know you guys have done impersonations of Randy Newman on the pod before and they were fine. But for me, I can only ever hear the Family Guy Randy Newman impersonation. Like that is more resonant with me than like actual Randy Newman's voice. But I agree. It would have been pretty terrible to hear his voice. I unfortunately have to hear that all the time because Toy Story is watched almost daily in my household. And You've Got a Friend in Me, which I think is literally the worst song that's ever been written, that is sung daily. But I wasn't as much into the My Little Buttercup song as you guys were. I did think that Steve Martin and Martin Short did a funny job dancing to it, but I don't know. You guys didn't think it went on too long? I mean, I was like,
never.
I was ready for it to get cut off.
No, when they do that and then click their heels together, or when they go up to the Mexican bandito in the bar and he goes, "Smile." As a Texan, you should appreciate this. That is the accent down to a T. And then, of course, we get the bartender who has like 3 lines in this movie and is forever. I mean, that's the part of the movie that I quote the most. When they ask him if tequila is fattening, and he says, "Fattening?" Or like, what's tequila? It's like beer. I mean, My Little Buttercup. This guy, Fred Asparagus, sadly, he did die of a heart attack in 1998. So our hearts go out to Fred Asparagus.
Well, I think this is a perfect example, though, that the best lines, I feel like, in this entire movie are given to the supporting characters, not to the main 3 guys. And he's a perfect example of that. I mean, I liked all the ones you said, but the second huge laugh for me was when he said, this town's getting too rough for me after everybody shot in the bar. I mean, that was pretty fucking funny.
Oh, so funny. And I love that after the first fight, you see them rush in and reset the entire room. They have a new table. They put the railings back up. It is so good.
Well, the other thing that I think that worked really well are the sight gags in this movie. And that's such an 80s thing, like relying solely on like these visual images. I mean, the mariachi outfits, the fact that Martin Short is so significantly shorter than the rest of them. I mean, that alone is pretty funny when they're on the horse together, dropping the food out of the tacos. Like all those sight gags are really, really funny. I don't think the dialogue is overtly funny, but the sight gags I do think work. And I wish that movies still did that because I think sight gags gags hold up so well over the years. I mean, really the only one I could think of who does this still is like Will Ferrell whenever he uses that weird like curly body hair that he has like that's pasted all over his chest. I mean, that's a funny sight gag, but comedians don't really rely on this anymore. It's that quick wit humor that I feel like is more prevalent. And I wish there were more things like this because it's really funny.
I mean, it's part of the reason Dumb and Dumber and Cable Guy have scored so high, on the Shat meter. It's because of those sight gags. And maybe, Ash, you hit on something here where part of the reason why quoting this movie to someone who's never seen it makes absolutely no sense is we're quoting it thinking they can see that part of the movie, that what makes it funny. If you're just doing the quote, it doesn't really work.
I think this movie deserves a medal. It's done something that I didn't know was possible. Honestly, how do you redeem Chevy Chase? Not as just an actor, but as a human being. We have eviscerated him. We have thrown him in the Fargo wood chipper of just critiques. We've torn him down as a human being. In this movie, it is the best version of Chevy Chase. He is in the background. Chevy is the best in small doses. He's not the main meal. He's a tapa. He's an appetizer. Okay. But if you put him in a supporting role, he's actually enjoyable, right? When Ned does the whole, oh, it's a mail plane. Do you see the balls? And Chevy Chase does not get the joke. How often have we seen Chevy Chase be the butt of the joke? He's normally the one laughing at someone else's expense, right? And in this movie, first one, Chevy's not the ladies' man. He's not the one hooking up with the hottest woman in town. It was so nice to see a different version of Chevy where he had to stand back, let Steve Martin ride this train. And it was so much more enjoyable.
It was great getting to see him think he was the ladies' man too, because he plays
exactly.
Dusty is the ladies' man on screen, but then you notice that Chase's interactions with women are totally awkward. What's really funny about this, though, is that Landis apparently hacked Chevy Chase's psychology. The story goes that while Landis was directing the movie, there was a line that Chase didn't want to do because he said that it would make Dusty Bottoms sound like a moron. And Landis was like, what fucking movie are you shooting? Like, that's the whole point. And so the way to get Chevy Chase to do it is he actually said, okay, fine, we'll just have Martin Short say the line. It'll get a great laugh. And Chevy Chase said, well, no, I want the line. And so then he did it anyway. I asked my mom today while I was hanging out with her. She just had surgery, so I spent the day with her. And I was like, Mom, can I ask you a question about Chevy Chase? Was he ever sexy? Like, did you guys ever think he was like a heartthrob in the 80s? She goes, oh, no.
Oh, thank goodness.
And I was like, well, why is he always like getting laid in all the movies or like all the women are after him? And she goes, well, he probably told them he had to. I was like, that's our theory. That's been our theory the whole time.
I was actually worried. I was just sitting here being like, is there going to be something about Jean's mother that I don't like? Am I going to subtly lose respect for her?
Never.
But thank goodness. Woo.
I mean, listen, the guy's 6'4". Women melt around tall men.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next morning, El Guapo and his gang come to Santo Poco and call out the Amigos. After Lucky gets shot in the arm, the Amigos realize that these are real bandits and they beg for mercy. El Guapo allows the Amigos to live, then has his men loot the village and kidnap Carmen. Ned persuades Lucky and Dusty to go after El Guapo, saying that they have nothing worth going back to in America, and this is their chance to be real heroes.
Okay, so I get that this movie's super well loved, but by this point, I still didn't really understand why. And I kind of started asking myself at this halfway point, like, what is this movie supposed to be? Because it starts as this old Hollywood spoof, and then there's this whole mistaken identity thing, and then you've got this really earnest musical number around the campfire, which is not played for comedy as much as it's played like really nicely. And I just didn't get it. And I started to really think about the fact that this is a much more memorable film than it is an actually good film. Because I know you guys remember the quotes, but like the actual jokes, like the actual enjoyment of the experience of watching it, not in those chunks, those sound bites, because this is a sound bitey movie, right? But like the whole film taken as a whole, I mean, by this point, guys, I have to be honest, I was kind of like, meh.
They're playing the campfire scene straight. They're singing horses. There's dancing animals. There's a talking turtle.
No, I mean up to the point where like Martin Short is singing and then it gets bizarre again. That's my point. Like you're literally making my point for me. Like you've got this nice little moment and then the fucking horses start singing. Like it is a weird combination of comedy. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's fucking not supposed to. What are you talking? It's
not
a story about
supposed to
three
make
movies.
sense.
No, no. Look, okay. You just have to have the scenes explain the rationale for people doing them. And I'm going to spoil it. This is the plot of A Bug's Life. There's a group of insects. The ants are being tortured by the grasshoppers who come and steal their food. So one of the ants goes off and finds a group of performers that he thinks are badass bugs that are going to come in and protect him. It's the same thing. And what makes it work, there's an earnestness to the characters. They don't realize how ridiculous they are. They're playing this seriously. Whether they're talking to a singing bush or the horses are mouthing or the turtles telling them to go to bed, it works for me. And this weird tone, though, does take a clear shift. About halfway through the movie is when they realize shit's real, right? And they go from these confident, earnest movie stars to they break down and start begging for their life. Oh, well, Mr. Guapo, is it okay if we can just leave here? Sorry about the mix up. And it gets serious. The music is dramatic. And these bandits, they fucking savage this town. They burn it to the ground, basically. They blow up the church. They start stealing the women. This shit gets real. And I love the tone change.
What separates an okay movie from a great movie is the decisions that are made, the little decisions. And Three Amigos makes the right decisions. They played this scene just right, Big D. Like El Guapo, they could have made him like a joke, or they could have made him a real badass. And instead they walked that line. He's not a nice guy, but like he does have a sense of fairness. You know, don't kill all of them. They're funny guys, right? Just kill one of them. And Lucky, when he gets shot, he is an adult and he is the leader. He doesn't just writhe around wailing like a baby. He dusts himself off. He marches over. He checks Jefe's gun and he sneers, "Real bullets." You know, it sets up that whimpering and the apologies. This is when seasoned comedians work. They make the right decisions.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't necessarily agree with you, Big D, that there's like a complexity of this, like an award-winning drama with the way that you set up that whole piece about them ravaging this town. Like, I mean, nobody
Gritty.
died. Nobody died. There was no blood. But that being said, I do agree with you, Gene, that this was a really smart comedic moment. And I said I was going to kind of gush over Steve Martin. I think he's what makes that scene work so well. Because, you know, Chevy Chase, even Martin Short, I mean, look at him on fucking Arrested Development when he was the guy whose legs don't work and he just got thrown everywhere. Like, there's a heavy-handedness to their humor, to both Chevy Chase and Martin Short, that a lot of people don't get. Steve Martin, though, there's just an ease to his humor. Like, it's very subtle. It's not in your face. And he sets up jokes. It's that long game that he plays and the way that he sets up jokes. And this one is a great example of that.
But the funniest guys in this movie by far are El Guapo and Jefe. Like, I can't think of a better villain and sidekick combo in any movie. I tried to like scour the internet for suggestions. I asked friends. The best I got was Dr. Evil and Mini-Me, Sauron and Saruman, Emperor Ming and Clytus from Flash Gordon. Yeah. Like, nobody comes close to this chemistry. El Guapo, he's not a bad guy. He's just bored. Like, he's literally just bored. That's why he's doing all this shit. Both the actor who plays El Guapo, Alfonso Arau, and Tony Plano, who plays Jefe, these are like serious stage actors and writers. They're directors. They understand theater and the craft.
Of course. And they are complex characters. They really are.
Right.
Hold on, just listen.
Like fucking cinema class with Big D on the fucking Three Amigos.
El Guapo is complex. There are multiple layers that make him up. He's not a cookie cutter villain, right? Honestly, just look at the beginning. He's got a hobby that you would never expect.
Oh my God.
He's a photographer and he's setting up some kind of like Aladdin Arabian scene. Right? He's teaching lessons to the guys in his gang. Even Jefe has learned from El Guapo. When El Guapo is really being passive aggressive with him, and he says, "Could it be, El Guapo, that you're really angry at something else, taking it out on me?" He's a mentor. They chip in and give him a sweater for his birthday. He is genuinely touched and he wears it later on. No other villain would do this. He's got words of wisdom. He's teaching them the proper use of plethora. You know, he tells Jefe about a woman and how you have to let a woman open her bloom and her petals for you. He is a mentor. He's a villain, but he means a lot to people, and they do all that with very little exposition here.
Also an incredible dancer. He's such a good dancer.
Yes.
I don't like to joke dance, especially like at weddings. I will a Guapo dance given the occasion anytime. Well, the Amigos spot a cargo plane and by the way, Ash's jaw is just wide open at this point.
She's not happy.
I just want to go back to the Clerks episode, which is like a true movie that like cinema classes are taught. And you're like, this is the worst movie. And these characters aren't well developed. And then we get to the fucking Three Amigos and you're like, the exposition was necessary and it's not supposed to make sense. And I mean, it's just, I'm so surprised by you, Big D, and how wrong you are.
Nostalgia cuts both ways, Ash.
Yeah.
Apparently, Lord.
The Amigos spot a cargo plane and follow it. The plane is flown by the German who has brought a shipment of rifles for El Guapo's gang. The Amigos try to sneak into the hideout, but Lucky is captured and chained up in a dungeon. Dusty crashes through a window into Carmen's room, and Ned ends up stuck, suspended from a piñata. The German challenges Ned to a shootout, and Ned kills him. Lucky holds El Guapo at gunpoint long enough for Carmen and the Amigos to escape in the German's plane.
Okay, so the one preteen joke that I think is beyond funny in this movie is that shot of El Guapo on his horse and Jefe's talking to him from the ground, and there is that one stalk cactus that is so perfectly sticking out of his crotch, and it is fucking hilarious. And that part I laughed at a ton as 37, and I can just imagine you guys as like a 12-year-old boy and like a 15-year-old boy seeing this, that must have been absolutely hilarious.
I mean, yeah, saguaro dicks are always funny. Each of the Amigos predicaments to me, though, was hilarious, and they all worked. Like Lucky in the dungeon with, gonna make it, gonna make it, gonna make it, and then getting slammed back in the wall with this elaborate contraption. Dusty flying through the window and going straight into the wardrobe. And then my favorite is fucking Ned getting his spurs stuck in the piñata. Oh, man. Like El Guapo, telling the guy to hold his hat up and then shooting him instead. There's like a running 15 minutes of great gags here that I absolutely fucking adore.
Oh, and it is weaved together so perfectly. It starts with Dusty. I'm going to distract the guy up on the tower with the gun. He hits him in the head with the rock. He falls. Their plan completely falls apart. But it's weaved in again with this birthday party, and everybody's showing their affection for their mentor, for El Guapo. And El Guapo is saying, I have a relationship with everyone in the gang. These aren't just numbers to him, Ashley. These are like members of his family. He's going around and he's like, hey, Jeffrey or, Carlos, we raided the village. And it gets to Chevy Chase. And I'm like, oh my God, Chevy is going to go be Chevy again. And it's going to be just absolutely terrible. No, he does. We raped the horses. It is so good, so funny, and I really don't care that I'm just gushing over this movie. It all works.
And I know we've talked a lot about whether Chevy Chase or Martin Short have a role to play in this movie, if they're the best choices. And they actually weren't the first picks for Ned and Dusty. I think a lot of people know this. Steve Martin originally wanted Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, right? So SNL guys that he worked with. Chevy Chase ended up taking Aykroyd's role as Dusty Bottoms. And at one point, they wanted Ned to be played by John Candy, but John Candy was too big to be on a horse. He did movies later where he could ride a horse, but at the time he could not get on a horse. And then for a while it was going to be Steven Spielberg directing this movie, and he wanted to get Bill Murray and Robin Williams. But my favorite casting decision was, if they couldn't get Martin Short, they were going to go with Rick Moranis, and that would have been fucking hilarious.
I love Rick Moranis. I think that he is one of the funniest people, and he's one of the tiny actors like Martin Short, but I think he is light years funnier than Martin Short is. I think I would have a much better review and be gushing like you are, Big D, if Rick Moranis had been in this. Even John Candy having been in this, I think Robin Williams would have been a disaster because he would have taken like up all the air in the room. But Rick Moranis, I think that was a huge missed opportunity.
No, and again, I think Martin Short's one of those actors who we've almost forgotten about. I've gone probably 20 years without ever thinking about him. I really have. Rick Moranis, at least I thought about because somebody punched him walking down the streets of Manhattan recently. So I thought about him, but Martin Short, I haven't thought about in a long time. And he has this great turn. He's the character who pivots, who says, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to do what's right. He draws the line in the sand. Why are we going to go back? We have no money. We have no women. We have no self-respect. And that's what gets the three amigos to really rise up and come together against El Guapo.
Oh, I mentioned earlier that Lucky is the leader and Dusty is the lover. I love that they made Martin Short the killer. He's the ace. Like he's the gunslinger, right? And this was Martin Short's first real movie that he did, right? He was kind of brought in on a recommendation. Ash, you mentioned how small he is. He's 5'7", and they put him with two other amigos, Steve Martin, who's 6 feet tall, and Chevy Chase, who's 6'4". So it makes him look even smaller. Returning to Santa Poco, the amigos rally the villagers to stand up for themselves. Drawing inspiration from one of their old films, the villagers create improvised amigos costumes. The bandits arrive only to find themselves suddenly being shot at by amigos from all sides and falling into hidden trenches dug by the villagers. El Guapo's men either ride off or are shot, and he takes a fatal wound as well. El Guapo congratulates them, then shoots Lucky in the foot and dies. The amigos refuse a reward and ride off into the sunset.
So I mentioned earlier I didn't know what this movie was trying to be, and I think it does kind of all fall apart in the third act here, where they just start shooting and blowing everything up. But I will say this, I did think the shootout scene was better than the ending shootout scene of like Young Guns, for example, right? Where like the stuff they do is just stupid. Like the choices the regulators make are dumb. The three amigos, they're actually really kind of smart. Like that trench that they build, like the way that works, that part of the movie, I was like, wow, like that was a really smart and great moment of the film. And so that part worked. But I do think the movie's just kind of ready to be over with.
Oh my God. But El Guapo's death, when he's just laying there and he knows he's dying. All he wants to do is shoot Lucky in the foot and just say that he's tricky too. Like this is fucking great. And then he's just like, he's dead.
But there was a stupid move that was equal to Billy. Billy put himself in a chest and had the chest thrown out the window. In this, one of the amigos gets into a barrel and he's sitting out in the open. I'm like, that's fucking Billy. Just throw him out the window.
Well, and I think there's a reason that maybe it does fall apart in the end. Like, I didn't know this, but apparently this movie, when John Landis handed in his original cut, it was completely different, the whole last part of this film. And the studio completely chopped it up. And so Landis's version would have been totally different than the one that is here. Apparently there is a 2011 Blu-ray edition out with those cut scenes. So I didn't watch that, but if you like this movie, that might be worth looking up to see if perhaps the ending came together a bit differently and if it's funnier upon the Landis rewatch as opposed to what the studio chose to go with.
Yeah, Fran Drescher fans. If you like Fran Drescher, she's in a cut scene. But Ash, I'm glad you brought that up because I totally forgot to mention it. That Landis was tied up in court because of the whole Twilight Zone movie helicopter disaster. So, there was a lawsuit, and in it they were saying that Jonathan Landis was like telling the helicopter to fly lower, and it got hit. The rotor got blown off by some pyrotechnics. He did not have final say on the cut, and who knows? I mean, I think this is a great movie. Maybe it would have been better.
And I'm just so glad. So many movies get sequels they don't deserve. They did not do a sequel to this, even though there had been some talk of it. And I'm so glad. It ends in a way that kind of gets us back to the start of the movie where the characters are put in their place. Even though they've had this big win, you get Lucky who says, I'll return for you. And the girl's like, why? Why are you going to come back here? And you realize that even though these guys have been victorious, they're going to ride off into an uncertain future that I did not need to see. It was, yes, Ash, it's dumb, but it was a perfect closure on just something ridiculous, something you could never make today. This is such an 80s comedy. It doesn't make sense, and I don't know why that doesn't bother me.
Well, now is the time in the podcast where we give our wipe scores. Our wipe score is a way of telling you, the audience, what we thought of the movie and how many wipes it would take to get off our respective butts. 0 wipes is a perfect Ned Nederlander pistol twirl into the holster, clean as a whistle. 5 wipes is spending your wedding night with El Guapo and his beautiful, beautiful choppers. Ash, we'll start with you. How many wipes do you give Three Amigos?
So I tried, you guys. I really did. But I didn't necessarily find this movie super funny. I looked at, like you said, the original Rotten Tomatoes score, and I read a bunch of the original reviews, and only 50% of critics liked it. And I mean, critics are not the end all be all, especially with comedy. Like, they typically get comedy wrong. But I did agree with a lot of what they had to say, that it is quotable, but it isn't necessarily like a great film, that the parts don't necessarily add up to a great whole. Guys, if we get a commission for Robin Hood Men in Tights, I'm sure it will be the same thing where I'm gushing, and perhaps you guys will be looking at me like I'm absolutely insane. And I'll say this. Obviously, Tropic Thunder, obviously, Galaxy Quest, obviously, It's a Bug's Life. We're all influenced by this movie. If this movie hadn't happened, those movies wouldn't have happened because they're the same plot. But all three of those films, I think, are far superior to this movie, including It's a Bug's Life, Galaxy Quest being the funniest of them all. And because I enjoyed them so much better, I'm going to give this one, and I'm sorry, Justin, 3.5 wipes.
Well, Ash, I'll say this. Three Amigos is not the perfect movie I thought it was before Justin commissioned it. I like to think of this as like the Newcastle Brown Ale of movies. I loved it the first time I tried it. I still get it when I go to Casey Moore's, which is the bar where I first had a beer. I still love the taste of the memories that it brings back. Like you said, it might be more of a memorable film than a funny film. And I'll never turn this movie down. It is my Newcastle. But would I buy it for a friend who's never tried it before? Maybe, if nothing amazing is on tap. But if I have all the movies in the world to watch, I don't think this is going to be the one that I necessarily recommend to someone who's never seen it. This movie is for me. It's for Big D. It's for Justin and others like us who love it. But I understand it's not perfect. Watch this movie again in a room full of Amigos fans and have like a view along, and you've got yourself a party. I know Big D hates it, but get a theater full, quote the lines together. Maybe everybody shoots guns at the ceiling. We're having a good time. Wear a sweater. It's one white for me.
I think I was embarrassed to come to the self-realization that this movie and the lines and the scenes have taken up a place in my brain that is as fresh today. And watching it, I remembered everything that was coming, all the lines. It was like I had just seen it, and I probably haven't seen this in 20 years. Yes, I know that my review and my score of this movie is tainted, but I can't change that. I think I'm looking at this movie almost now retrospectively on the career of the actors. I'm looking at everything that Chevy Chase has done, everything that Steve Martin has done. And this movie strikes a rare balance for me where it is funny. It's not too predictable. It doesn't ask me to really stretch my brain. And coming off of something like Fargo, this was a really nice reminder of why I would go to the movies as a kid. And I can't help it. For me, it's one wipe. Today, yeah, I don't think this movie gets made, and I don't think it should be made, and I don't think it would be that funny. But in the 80s, when you look at like Spies Like Us, that was a disaster. That was everything going wrong. I think this is everything going right. So for me, it is one wipe. Loved it as a kid and loved it today.
All right. And with those three wipe scores combined, we have one wipe from me, one wipe from Big D, and 3.5 wipes from Ash. That brings us to an average wipe score of 1.83 repeating wipes for Three Amigos.
So that now ties it in the 75 spot with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Dogma, and Heathers. It is slightly better than Starship Troopers and Detroit Rock City, and slightly worse than Halloween 4, The Natural, and Gremlins. So it's in that zone.
This movie's so much better than The Natural.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. But I think that makes sense. I think I do think Starship Troopers is better than this movie, but I think the system still works. That's why you have me. My 3.5 kept you from making this a one wipe movie, which it is not.
All right. Well, thanks, Justin, for commissioning Three Amigos. Big D, we have one voicemail regarding your opinions on Minnesota accents.
Oh, no.
Hey, Shat Crew, it's Steve from Minnesota. So I did write a couple emails about the Fargo episode and then realized I need to make a correction. So instead of writing you a third email, I'm leaving a voicemail. First of all, sorry. Yes, the Minnesota accent is actually true, I guess. I didn't think it was because most of the people I know that live in the Twin Cities moved here from somewhere else. But as I was training my client Megan today, who was on Hot Ones with us, turns out she totally has a Minnesota accent. So it is a thing, but it's very rare. Not like you heard in Fargo. Even in the northern part of Minnesota, when I go to Duluth or up higher, they don't really have the accent. And then for food, dear God, there's so many good places to eat in the Twin Cities. It's insane. It's one of the best food places in the country. So I don't know about Radisson. I've never been there, but definitely not somewhere I would send anyone. Also, Gene, it's a Juicy Lucy, and I know you don't like them that much, but don't know where you had it. There's some of the best burgers I've had, especially when it's like cheese, jalapeno, and bacon stuffed in the middle. So good. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
I like that Steve called in to talk about Minnesota accents, not realizing that he has an accent.
I know, it's so strong.
Exactly. And also his delivery. It was very, so I realized, Jim, we had a Juicy Lucy. I love Minnesota. I really do. I don't think I want to lump it in with Fargo. I put out a tweet with my favorite things. I loved Prince. I loved Kirby Puckett. I like shopping at Target. Yeah, Minnesota's cool with me.
Also, regarding the Juicy Lucy, we got a lot of people writing in on Twitter and messaging me and saying, Gene, it's a Juicy Lucy, not a Juicy Boy. They're two separate things. So at Uptown in Minneapolis, the bar, there's a Juicy Boy, which is it's like a plastic orange, and they put like frozen Red Bull and vodka and some other shit in it, and it's fantastic and it's very good. Juicy Lucy's, on the other hand, Big D, I got to disagree with Steve here. You should not put your cheese, a slice of cheese, in the middle of a burger patty, because in order to melt that cheese, you got to burn the burger.
I actually cook burgers tonight, and I like the even distribution of the cheese on top. I don't like anything stuffed in the middle. Yeah. It's a waste.
But yes, Steve, the Twin Cities Vietnamese food is fantastic. Big D, what do we have coming up next?
Oh boy. So next week we will be delving into an arena that we've done only a couple times before with animated movies. So we had a commission from Daniel M., and he commissioned a film whose story takes place in 2005, 20 years after the events of the television series' second season, after the death of Optimus Prime during a devastating assault on Autobot City. The Autobots are pursued by Galvatron, the regenerated form of Megatron, and servant to Unicron, a planet-devouring transformer who sets out to consume Cybertron. The soundtrack was composed and synthesized music by Vincent DiCola and heavy metal by various groups. This came out in 1986. It was directed by Nelson Sin. And I love the TV show, so I think I'm going to love this one as well.
I'm a big Transformers nerd, guys, just as a warning. Huge Transformers nerd. This one I did see as a kid and loved it. So
I'm embarrassed to say I had GoBots. Does that mean I was like the kid with like the knockoff Frosted Flakes?
No, I had GoBots too. Well, we were raised in a different echelon than Ashley.
Oh my God.
Oh. Ashley's like, I had Voltron with the metal lions, not the plastic ones. They were the real ones from Japan. Mm-hmm. Daddy ordered them.
Mm-hmm. And I played with it while I was riding my pony. Mm-hmm. Whatever. Fuck you guys.
Well, thank you, Ash. Thank you, Big D. Thank you, Justin. And thank you, Daniel, for your commissions. And thank you for all the commissioners who make Shat the Movies possible. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. You can email us, host@shatthemovies.com, or leave us a voicemail like Steve did at 914-719-SHAT. You can also support the podcast by shopping our Amazon affiliate link, completing a free anonymous survey to help attract advertisers, buy our merch, or commission your own movie. Find all that information by visiting our website, shatthemovies.com. Still time to get your Christmas gifts from the Shat store. Also, you can check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Lovecraft Country, Westworld, True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. Find all that info on our website, shatontv.com, wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review letting know Ash how much you love her. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, Ash Lafley, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for the following movie.
Hold on tight. The most incredible rock and roll adventure ever is here.
Feed him to the shark guns.
Starring Judd Nelson as Hot Rod, Leonard Nimoy as
Galvatron,
and Orson Welles Beyond good, beyond evil, beyond your wildest imagination. Transformers, the movie. Transformers, the movie. Coming to a theater near you this August.